Brother and sister, there are moments in history when a nation isn't just tested by weapons or words, but by will. Moments when the world expects it to fall, but instead, it stands. This is one of those moments. And this is one of those stories. They came with pressure, with plans, with power. They came to break Iran, but what they didn't expect was courage. And courage, true courage, doesn't just resist. It echoes. It shakes the ground. It changes the world. Let us talk about a force that weapons cannot defeat. Let us talk about the unshakable spirit of a people who refused to bow. They thought they could bring it to its knees. They thought sanctions would starve the soul. They thought threats would silence its voice. But what they didn't understand is that courage lives deeper than strategy. It doesn't die when it's outnumbered. It doesn't flee when surrounded. It burns. They tried to isolate it. But you can't isolate identity. You can't blockade a heartbeat. You can't silence a people who know where they come from and what they stand for. You see, when you come to break something that was forged in fire, all you do is remind it how to burn brighter. The courage of Iran is not loud. It doesn't boast. It doesn't scream. But it endures. It rebuilds. It keeps walking through storms, dust, and darkness, knowing that dignity walks beside it. Courage is not about never being hurt. It's about standing even while you bleed. And this nation, this people, they stood tall when the world expected them to fall. They didn't retaliate with chaos. They didn't collapse in fear. They answered with resilience, with presence, with unbreakable identity. You see, courage isn't in the speeches. It's in the quiet acts. It's in a mother raising her child under threat. It's in a young man starting a business with nothing but belief. It's in a father walking miles for bread and still smiling. That is courage. And that courage is contagious, because courage never stays silent. It whispers to the oppressed. It calls out to the watching world. It says, "We are still here, and we are not afraid." They came to break Iran, but what they did instead was awaken it. And in awakening it, they reminded the world, you can never break a people who know their worth. History remembers the powerful, but it honors the brave. And in this moment, it wasn't the strength of armies that made history. It was the strength of the spirit. True courage doesn't walk into the room demanding to be seen. It doesn't shout to prove its existence. It doesn't wear a uniform or ask for medals. Not true courage is far quieter than that. It's the kind of force that doesn't need to raise its voice, because its presence speaks louder than anything it could ever say. Courage isn't forged on stages or in applause. It's born in silence, in struggle, in long nights when the weight of the world sits heavy on your chest and you still choose to breathe, to rise, to take another step. True courage is the person who gets up knowing the odds, knowing the cost, and walking forward anyway, not because they're fearless, but because they're faithful to something deeper. When the world came down hard on Iran, when the pressure mounted, when the strategies of foreign powers leaned in with all their might to fracture it, many expected noise. They expected Iran to scream, to lash out, to crumble under the weight. But what they witnessed instead was something more profound. They witnessed endurance. And that's where courage lives. Endurance is not weakness. It's not passive. It's not surrender. Endurance is a different kind of strength. The kind that doesn't break when it bends. The kind that doesn't collapse when it carries more than it should have to. The kind that keeps the people standing when the world is watching and waiting for them to fall. It's easy to mistake silence for defeat. It's easy to assume that because someone isn't shouting, they must be finished. But silence is where resilience gathers itself, where pain becomes wisdom, where resolve becomes armor. Iran didn't answer force with force. It didn't match volume with volume. It stood, quietly, firmly, proudly. That kind of quiet, that kind of grace under pressure is louder than any declaration. You see, the kind of courage that endures doesn't always win battles in headlines, but it wins wars in history. Because history isn't written by the loudest voice. It's written by the strongest will. And will isn't something you can measure in speeches or shows of force. Will is measured by how long you can hold your ground when the earth beneath you begins to shake. People don't always understand endurance. They confuse it with delay or weakness. But let me tell you this, there's nothing stronger than a people who've learned how to suffer and still stand tall. There's nothing more terrifying to the powerful than a soul that refuses to be conquered. And Iran's story, its people's story, is full of that quiet power, that timeless persistence, that refusal to bow even when bending would be easier. Think of the mother who waits in line for bread, not knowing what tomorrow will bring, but still tells her children bedtime stories full of hope. Think of the craftsman who goes to work in a broken economy, still pouring his spirit into every detail of his work, because pride matters more than profit. Think of the teacher who walks into a classroom with limited resources and still teaches with fire in their heart, because the future must be prepared, no matter the present. These aren't headlines. These are not televised. But this is where true courage lives, in the ordinary, in the quiet, in the enduring strength of people who refuse to let circumstance steal their dignity. So when the world came expecting rage, collapse, or surrender, it found something far more unsettling: peace in resistance, calm in chaos, faith in the face of fire. And that is why true courage doesn't scream it endures, because endurance is not an act. It's a way of life. It's the invisible thread that runs through generations. The memory of every trial survived. The echo of every ancestor who stood before and said, "We may bend, but we do not break." A courage that screams may win the moment, but courage that endures, that lives in patience, in perseverance, in purpose, that's the courage that shapes nations. That's the courage that changes the world. There are things in this world that can be broken. Bones, machines, economies, even nations. But belief, real belief, is not one of them. You can apply pressure to it. You can starve it, silence it, surround it. But you cannot break what is truly built on belief. because belief doesn't come from outside. It isn't handed out by governments, taught in textbooks, or traded like a currency. Belief is something born within. It's planted in the soul, watered by struggle, rooted in heritage, and shielded by the memory of what came before. And when something is built on belief, it becomes a fortress no weapon can bring down. When they came for Iran, when sanctions tightened, when headlines darkened, when every move was designed to cripple and crush, what they were really attacking was the idea of a nation. But they misunderstood one thing: Iran isn't built on convenience. It isn't built on diplomacy alone, or wealth, or fear of power. Iran was built on conviction, and conviction doesn't crack under pressure. You see, belief doesn't need proof to exist. In fact, it often thrives without it. When the world says, "You're finished," belief whispers, "We've only just begun." When circumstances scream, "It's impossible," belief replies, "Watch me." And that's exactly what the world witnessed. A nation that should have been broken, but wasn't. A people that should have folded, but didn't. Not because they had everything, but because they still believed in something. Belief gives you the strength to hold the line when the world pushes you back. It lets you build when others only see rubble. It keeps you warm when the cold winds of isolation try to freeze your soul. And it reminds you, even in the darkest night, that you are not alone, because you carry the weight of generations who never gave up. Even when it would have been easier, they tried to break Iran with silence, with separation, with scarcity. But what they created instead was unity, resolve, reflection. Because belief doesn't wither in isolation, it becomes clearer. And the more they tried to dismantle the external, the more the internal grew stronger. Belief turns hardship into fuel. It turns every obstacle into an opportunity to remember what really matters. And when a people are united by belief, their connection runs deeper than law or leadership. It becomes personal, sacred, a bond that can't be undone by pressure from outside forces. It's easy to break what's only held together by fear. It's easy to dismantle systems that are built on pride or profit. But when something is built on faith, real, lived in, time-tested faith, there's nothing you can do to shake it, because it doesn't live in policies or headlines. It lives in hearts, in the hands that keep working, in the eyes that keep watching, in the voices that keep singing even when no one is listening. Iran's strength wasn't born overnight. It wasn't the result of politics or power. It came from belief, passed from mother to son, father to daughter, generation to generation. A belief that identity matters, that heritage matters, that purpose matters more than pressure. And that's why, in the face of all that tried to break it, Iran stood. Not shouting, not pleading, simply standing. Because when you know what you're built on, you don't need to explain it. You live it. They came thinking force would win, but they forgot that belief outlasts force. Belief doesn't expire. It doesn't rust. It doesn't give up. And in that silence, in that resilience, the world saw a truth it couldn't ignoring. You cannot break what is built on belief. not with bombs, not with borders, not with isolation, not even with time, because belief is eternal. It echoes through generations, and when the dust settles and the world looks back at what was meant to be a collapse, they'll see something else entirely. Not a nation that was broken, but a nation that believed too deeply to ever be undone. Isolation is often seen as punishment, a sentence meant to separate, to weaken, to diminish. The world tends to look at isolation and assume decline, loss, a slow unraveling of strength. But that's only one perspective, the surface level view. Because what some call isolation, others call refinement, others call clarity. And if you've ever truly faced solitude, real deafening, suffocating solitude, you know it doesn't just take things away from you. Sometimes it gives you back the most important thing of all, yourself. When the world turned its back on Iran, when it was boxed out, locked down, pushed into corners meant to check its growth, many assumed the nation would begin to fade, that it would lose itself trying to hold on, that the people would forget who they were without the approval, the connection, the access that others take for granted. But that's not what happened, because Iran didn't wither in isolation, it remembered. It reclaimed its identity, not through validation from outside, but through introspection from within. Sometimes, the noise of the world drowns out your own voice. It's easy to lose your reflection in the mirrors others hold up to you. Easy to start measuring your worth by how many hands shake yours or how many nations trade with you. But then comes isolation, the space where all those voices go quiet. And at first it's unsettling, lonely. But then, if you sit with it long enough, you begin to hear something new, or maybe something ancient, something you forgot, the sound of your roots speaking. That's what happened to Iran. It didn't break under the silence. It listened. It remembered its poets, its prayers, its deserts and rivers and mountains, its ancestors, its language, its soul. And that remembering became a kind of revival, a return to origin. Because when you're cut off from the world, what's left is what can't be taken. Your culture, your stories, your truth. This is the paradox. While the world assumed isolation would weaken Iran, what it actually did was deepen it. The distance created a space where the nation no longer needed to prove itself to anyone. It didn't have to explain its pride or negotiate its purpose. It simply began to be. And in that being, the fire of identity burned brighter than ever. Isolation is not a cell. It's a mirror. It shows you who you are when no one is watching. And for Iran, that mirror reflected strength. Not the kind that shouts or strikes, but the kind that remembers, the kind that breathes in tradition and breathes out innovation, the kind that carries memory like armor and walks forward without needing applause. When they tried to isolate Iran, they thought they were removing opportunity. But what they really did was remove distraction. They gave it time to look inward, to refine what matters, to decide, once and for all, that its value does not lie in being accepted. It lies in being authentic. And that authenticity, that quiet fire, that's what shook the world. Because it's one thing to resist the pressure of outside forces, but it's another thing entirely to emerge from solitude with your identity not just intact, but stronger, sharper, unshakable. You see, when a nation rediscovers who it is, not who others say it should be, that's when the ground shifts. That's when silence becomes strategy. That's when exile becomes evolution. That's when the world looks back and realizes what was meant to isolate only inspired. Aaron did not disappear in the shadows. It studied them. It grew in them. And when the light returned, it didn't come back begging for connection. It came back rooted, self-aware, whole, because identity built in crowds can vanish with the crowd. But identity built in solitude, that lasts forever. And the louder the world gets, the more sacred that stillness becomes. So yes, they tried to isolate Iran. But what they didn't count on was what happens when you force a nation to turn inward. They didn't count on how dangerous a people become when they truly know themselves. There is something sacred about dignity. It's not loud. It doesn't wave flags or demand recognition. It moves quietly like a river beneath the earth. Steady, deep, and enduring. Dignity isn't the kind of thing you wear on your chest or carry in your wallet. It's not a title. It's not wealth. It's not something anyone can hand to you, because it's something that lives inside you. And once it's there, no one can take it away. That's what makes dignity so powerful. You can strip a person of comfort. You can cut off their resources, isolate their nation, try to erase their name from headlines, and erase their voice from conversations. But if they have dignity, if they truly know who they are and what they stand for, they won't beg. They won't bow. They'll walk through the fire with their head held high, and they'll do it without asking for rain. Because rain might cool the heat, but it doesn't cleanse the soul. It doesn't define the spirit. What defines you is how you carry yourself in the fire. When things are hard, when you're tested, when the world turns its back and the easy path disappears, that's when the true weight of dignity is felt. That's when you see the difference between pride and purpose. Iran, in many ways, was placed in that fire, pressed from all sides, sanctioned, cornered, pressured, and yet it never begged. It never sacrificed its dignity for relief. The fire was real, yes. Economic hardship, political tension, global scrutiny. But through it all, the people walked with a quiet pride. They didn't shout for pity. They didn't compromise their identity for comfort. They endured because they knew something greater was at stake. Honor. Dignity is the ability to suffer without losing yourself. It's what lets a mother feed her family from scraps and still smile. It's what lets a father lose his job, but not his sense of worth. It's what allows a nation to be criticized, isolated, even threatened, and still speak in its own voice, walk in its own rhythm, and hold its head high, even when its back is bent from the weight. And there's a kind of beauty in that, a nobility that doesn't make the news, but is etched into the hearts of those who witness it. Because anyone can walk proud in luxury. Anyone can wear pride like a coat when the weather is fine, but only the truly strong can carry their dignity through storms, through ashes, through fire, and emerge not just standing, but unashamed. There's no glory in begging for relief when you still have your soul. There's no power in surrendering what makes you whole just for the temporary comfort of ease. Iran chose to carry its pain, not as a curse, but as a reminder that the flame may burn the body, but it cannot touch the soul unless you let it. And that's what dignity is, the refusal to let the fire define you. And so they walked through it. The merchants, the mothers, the artists, the farmers, all of them carrying the quiet torch of a nation that would not kneel. But it happened. That didn't mean they didn't suffer. It didn't mean they didn't feel the sting of pressure, but they chose how to respond to it. They chose not to collapse into victimhood, not to turn their fire into rage or chows. They stood with restraint, with discipline, with focus. And that's what the world didn't expect, because it's easy to fight fire with fire. It's easy to let pain turn to bitterness, but it takes real courage, mature courage, to endure pain without becoming it, to suffer without shrinking, to walk through flames with everything at risk, and still say, I know who I am, and I will not beg for the storm to stop. I will walk through it. That kind of strength is not loud. It's not always understood, but it is unbreakable. Because dignity is not about looking strong. It's about being strong when no one's watching. It's about knowing that your soul, your story, your sense of self, those are the treasures no one can touch unless you give them away. And Iran didn't give them away, not for comfort, not for approval, not even for peace. It chose instead to walk through the fire without ever begging for rain. Bravery is one of the most misunderstood qualities in the world. We often picture it as something loud, a shout, a charge, a bold strike in the face of threat. We think of it as retaliation, as action, as force meeting force. But real bravery, the kind that holds weight across generations, often wears a different face, a quieter one, a wiser one. Real bravery is not always about what you do. Sometimes it's about what you choose not to do. Bravery isn't shown in retaliation. It's revealed in restraint, because retaliation is easy. It's instinctual. When someone hurts you, the natural reaction is to strike back, to answer pain with pain, anger with more anger. Retaliation feels satisfying for a moment. It feels like power. But power without control is just chaos wearing a mask. Restraint, on the other hand, takes something deeper. It takes patience. It takes awareness. It takes the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself in the eyes of the world. When you have the power to retaliate, and you choose instead to pause, to reflect, to calculate, that's not weakness. That's mastery. And that's where true courage lies. When Iran was challenged, pushed, provoked, when its dignity was tested by pressure and its sovereignty questioned by global forces, many expected the worst, a furious response, a chaotic reaction. The world watched, waiting for fire to meet fire. But something else happened. Iran held its ground, not just with defenses, but with discipline. It showed that real strength isn't in matching rage, but in choosing peace when you have every reason not to. It didn't need to shout back, because the silence of its restraint spoke louder. That's the kind of bravery the world doesn't always recognize in the moment, but never forgets, because it's one thing to act when your enemies expect you to. That's predictable. But when you choose not to act the way they hope, when you defy their expectations, not with destruction, but with discipline, you throw them off balance, you change the conversation. You move from reaction to leadership. Bravery shown through restraint is a kind of moral intelligence. It's the understanding that sometimes the greatest impact doesn't come from what you destroy, but from what you preserve. It's knowing when to hold the line and when to walk away, not because you're afraid, but because you know your values are worth more than proving a point. There's a quiet kind of heroism in holding back, in choosing to live another day, in protecting your people not by shouting into the fire, but by shielding them from it. Iran, in many moments of tension and trial, chose patience over provocation. And that choice didn't make it weak. It made it sovereign. Because restraint doesn't mean surrender. It means self-command. It means owning your choices so fully that no one else gets to decide how you respond. And when you own your responses, you reclaim your dignity. You remain the author of your story. So while others may point to explosive acts as symbols of bravery, I would tell them to look again. Look at the father who tells his son, "We don't hate. We hold our ground." Look at the leaders who face insult and pressure and still speak with clarity, not fury. Look at a nation that has the capacity to retaliate, but the wisdom to know that survival isn't just about standing. It's about enduring with honor. Retaliation fades. It comes and goes like firecrackers in the sky. But restraint leaves a legacy. Because when the dust settles and history looks back, it remembers the ones who chose control over chaos. It remembers the ones who chose not to be ruled by their wounds. That's the kind of bravery Iran showed the world, not with flags and noise, but with silence filled with meaning, with measured strength, with the kind of maturity that understands that some battles are won not by fighting, but by refusing to be pulled into a fight that robs you of your soul. That kind of courage is timeless. That kind of strength is rare. And that kind of restraint is what sets apart the truly brave from those simply looking to be feared. And now the dust has settled. The strategies have played out. The world has watched, calculated, measured, and waited. They came to break a nation, convinced it would fracture like glass under pressure, convinced its silence was surrender, that its restraint was weakness, that its isolation would dissolve the core of who it was. But they miscalculated something timeless, something unteachable, something unbreakable. They underestimated the power of courage. They expected resistance in the form of rage. But what they saw instead was a resistance born of wisdom, dignified, grounded, immovable. And that shook the world. Because this wasn't just political survival. This wasn't about stubbornness or pride. What the world witnessed was the rise of a people who remembered who they were. When it mattered most, they thought they could break it. But how do you break what doesn't rely on outside approval to stand tall? How do you dismantle something built not on trade or treaties, but on truth? How do you weaken a people who have learned to carry pain with grace, to endure hardship without bitterness, and to walk through fire without begging for rain? They didn't just survive the pressure. They were refined by it. And maybe that's the lesson the world needed to see. That true courage doesn't scream. It endures. That you cannot break what is built on belief. That when a nation is forced into silence, it begins to hear its own voice more clearly. That isolation doesn't erase identity. It strengthens it. That dignity is not found in avoiding fire, but in walking through it with your soul intact. And that real bravery isn't in striking back, it's in knowing when to stand still, when to hold peace like a sword, when to choose legacy over impulse. The world saw a nation that chose not to beg, not to bow, and not to break. And in doing so, Iran became something more than a geopolitical headline. It became a reminder to every struggling people, every silent voice, every corner of the world where oppression tries to choke identity, that you are not defeated when you are cornered. You are only defeated when you forget who you are. Iran remembered. It remembered its ancestors, its language, its land, its resilience. It remembered that no sanction can measure the worth of a soul. No embargo can cage a spirit. No threat can uproot a people who are planted in their purpose. But it happened. It remembered that power isn't always loud, but it is always felt. And the world, even those who opposed it, had to take notice, because there's something undeniable about quiet strength, something haunting about dignity that doesn't flinch, something noble about a nation that chooses restraint when retaliation would have been easier. That kind of courage can't be manufactured. It can't be imported. It can't be forced. It is grown, watered by memory, raised in silence, shaped by fire. So to those who came to break Iran, understand this: you didn't destroy it. You didn't erase it. You revealed it. You revealed what happens when a people stand together, not in anger, but in conviction, not in chows, but in clarity. You revealed the strength of a soul that refuses to sell itself. And in doing so, you didn't fracture Iran, you magnified it. And to those watching, the young, the voiceless, the misunderstood, let this be your message. They may try to isolate you. They may try to silence you. They may test your patience, your values, your identity. But if you hold to who you are, if you carry your dignity like a torch, if you choose courage, even in the quiet, you will not just survive the pressure. You will shake the world, because strength that is silent is strength that lasts. And those who are built on belief will never fall.